We've all heard the saying, don't blame the messenger. And if you're an advisor, you've probably found yourself in a situation where you might like to say that to a student. As advisors, we share information about department and college-wide policies, information about degree requirements, transfer admissions requirements, and so much more. Sometimes we have to share bad news. We have to tell a student that their low GPA means that they can't graduate, or they haven't met all of the prerequisites to apply to a certain program. We as the messengers have to deal with delivering the bad news as well as helping the student in the aftermath. In this presentation, we will tackle how to have tough conversations with students and how we can play an important part in changing the student's perspective by providing empathy and support. When we inevitably have to give bad news, the delivery of that news is so important. One suggested approach is to use the Spikes framework. This framework was actually adopted by an academic advisor from a protocol that physicians use to deliver bad news to their patients. S stands for setting up for the appointment. If you know in advance that you're going to have to deliver bad news, preparation for that is key. Make sure you're in a private space if possible. Make sure you have enough time to devote to the student. If the advising appointment is 30 minutes, devote your attention to that student for the full time allotted. You do not want to deliver the bad news and then rush the student away. And be familiar with the student's information. If you're going to make referrals, have that information at hand. P is for perception. Students aren't always aware of their situation. I've had students unaware that they failed their classes in a semester and unaware of their GPA. You want to engage with them to determine their level of awareness, as well as how realistic their view is of the situation. Ask questions like, how are your classes going? Or how did you do in your classes last semester? Do you know what your GPA is? The student's perception of the situation will determine how the conversation proceeds. If they are aware that they did not do well in a class, they can probably focus on strategizing their next step with you. If they did not know that they failed a class, there will be an element of shock for them, and you may have to help them through this before you can begin to come up with any plans for success. And this brings us to I, which is for invitation to discuss. If a student is shocked, they may not be ready to plan their next steps. You can ask them if now is a good time to discuss their options. K is for knowledge. During this phase, you will explain the circumstances of the situation using easy to understand words and appropriate tone of voice. You will want to be non-judgmental and refrain from using acronyms or jargon that the student may not be familiar with. Studies have shown that starting out by saying that you have bad news to share can help lessen the shock as well. E is for empathy. Students need to know that we care about their situation and that it is safe for them to express their emotions in our presence. It may be hard for us to see the student in pain, and that can lead us to change the subject quickly or try to give them some false hope. Instead, we should be supportive but realistic, acknowledge their feelings, ask questions about how they feel, and validate their emotions. The last phase is strategize and summarize, and how students react will determine the best way to proceed. You may need to schedule a follow-up appointment if the student is in shock. But if the student's accepting of the news, then you can begin to devise a plan to explore their options. There are a number of types of tough conversations that can take place between a student and an advisor. Not all of those fit organically within the Spikes framework. Just remember that with any tough conversation, you want to listen and be empathetic. Refrain from placing blame. This will only cause a student to shut down and not trust you as an ally in their education. We know you may have told them and warned them about this situation. They may have had, 2 or 3 chances. But we're not here to place blame. We're here to help them see and learn from their mistakes. Guide them to realistic solutions. While we aren't blaming and shaming the student, we still want them to learn and grow and succeed. Next, we will examine a few of the tough conversations you may run into and look at specific measures you can use to provide students the support that they need. Students face difficulty in classes for many differing reasons. When a student struggles in their classes, it isn't always due to lack of comprehension. It can be a lack of study skills, a lack of time, resources, or support. You may notice by looking at a student's record that they are struggling with their classes, or they may bring it to your attention in the advising session. If a student does not disclose that they are struggling in their classes, some things to look for include withdrawals from the same class in multiple semesters, multiple withdrawals each semester, and large course loads with a low GPA. However the conversation comes about, listening to what the student has to say is key to understanding why they are struggling. Determining the cause of the struggle will help you determine what resources to share with the student. If a student withdraws from the same class each semester, have a conversation with them about why that happened. Ask questions about their experience in the class. If a student truly is struggling with the material, make sure they are aware of the services through Academic Skills Center. If they reveal that they are working too many hours or have a hard time studying, share techniques or resources that combat those specific issues. There are a number of free resources online that teach students these skills. Sometimes difficulty in classes boils down to poor planning. They're working full-time and going to school full-time. They schedule 16 hours each semester when really they should be taking 9 to 12 hours. They schedule heavy semesters full of their worst subjects. Each student is unique, and we can help them determine what the key to success is for them. We just have to listen to what they have to say. GPA determines whether a student can graduate, transfer to a university, or be granted admissions to some of JCC's competitive programs. GPA is even requested on some job applications. The key to not having to have as many difficult conversations with students about a low GPA is to normalize talking about GPA with every student. GPA populates on the advising plan when you enter in a student's ID number. Make sure you look at this with each student. Speak to students about their GPA in the context of their interests and goals. If they're interested in applying to a competitive health science program, show them their GPA and then show them the required GPA for that specific program. Help them understand how GPAs work. Some students do not understand that while C grades are considered passing and will transfer, they keep your GPA hovering around the 2.0 mark. JCC students must have at least a 2.0 to graduate. When you see a student whose GPA is dropping below the 2.5 mark, and especially nearing that 2.3 range, you want to begin having conversations about why this is happening and what can be done to improve their GPA. Retaking classes is one of the quickest ways to boost a low GPA. If a student has failed some of their required classes, discuss their experience in those classes. See if you can guide them to skills, techniques, or new study habits to ensure that their retake is successful. If a student did poorly in all of their classes in a semester, it may not be best to have them retake all of the same classes. This can make students feel stagnant and become unmotivated. Have them retake 1 or 2 classes, and then have them pick other classes in subjects that interest them or that they feel that they can do well. Encourage students to proactively use the tutoring resources provided by the Academic Skills Center. Many students view tutoring as something that you use when you're struggling in or even failing a class. Help them understand that tutoring can improve their understanding of a subject before they fall behind. It isn't just for students who need to go from failing to passing. It can be the difference in a C and a B, or even a B and an A. Students with a low GPA can often benefit from strategic course planning, as we've discussed before. Sometimes those with a GPA hovering around a 2.0 are those students who are taking too many classes, or pairing a number of difficult classes together in one semester. Find out if the student is working and how many hours. What are their best subjects? Are they comfortable with online classes? For example, if a student needs anatomy and physiology and they explain that science is not their strongest subject, then I would not pair that with other science classes. Usually I would suggest that they take the class in person. However, if online is the only option, then I would encourage them to limit the other credit hours that they take and try not to take any classes that they know they also struggle in. This type of strategic course planning is good for all students. However, it's especially important for those with a low GPA, and you may get pushback from students at some of these suggestions. Often I hear, if I'm taking less credit hours, won't it take me longer? Yes, but if you continue taking too many credit hours and your GPA is below a 2.0, you won't be able to graduate or transfer. If your student is skeptical of your suggestions, take the time to ask them questions that will make them think through the outcome of what they want to do. What will happen if you take anatomy and chemistry in the same semester? You did that last semester. How will this semester be different? Sometimes you may feel like you're pointing out the obvious, but it isn't always obvious to the student. Talking through the outcome and letting them come to the realization themselves is best. One of the best parts of our jobs in higher education is helping students realize their dreams. Our students may be applying to one of JCC's competitive health science programs, trying to transfer to a university, or even applying for jobs. While we hope our students are able to move on in their educational or career journey, we will inevitably be there for some of the bumps along the way. When a student shares their rejection with you, allow them to vent and express their emotions. If a student is sharing bad news, it probably took some courage for them to open up to you. They may be feeling a mix of emotions, from grief, embarrassment, loss of motivation, and uncertainty. These students may just need a listening ear and may not be ready to plan anything. Be empathetic and, again, non-judgmental. Others may be sharing their news with you to get your input so that you can help them determine how to find a new path. Some students may already have a plan and just need reassurance. Others may need to start from square one. Listen to them and try to determine their needs, and then share appropriate resources, such as career services. Be supportive and encouraging, but also realistic. Help students see that there are so many options out there that they may not have explored yet. One way to make having these difficult conversations easier is to implement positive frameworks into your everyday advising conversations. You're probably familiar with the iceberg analogy. People only see the tip of the iceberg, and for students that's success. And they don't see what's below the surface, the hard work, disappointment, failure. We as advisors have the power to change students' perspectives and to see the big picture rather than focusing on one singular thing. We can help them learn to reframe failure by reframing it ourselves. I'm going to introduce 2 frameworks to you now that you can implement in your everyday interactions with students, whether it's in the classroom, advising sessions, or somewhere in between. One is a bigger framework, a theory of advising, and another is a smaller learning theory you may be familiar with. You can implement small aspects of both, or you can read further about how these 2 theories can be used in advising and education to incorporate in your own advising philosophy. Growth mindset is the belief that intelligence and learning capabilities can be changed and can improve over time. You're not stuck or fixed. A student that has had bad study skills in high school isn't doomed in college. They can learn and change their habits. Those with a growth mindset are often open to trying new things. They accept feedback well, and they see failure as a way that they can grow. Someone with a fixed mindset will see failure as a reflection of their ability, take feedback personally, feel like they're being criticized, and are more likely to let their frustrations lead them to quitting. If we encourage students to reframe their failure, encouraging a growth mindset, then we can help students see that making mistakes and experiencing failure is an opportunity to allow their brain to grow. Appreciative advising is an advising approach that uses positive, open-ended questions to help students optimize their educational experiences and achieve their goals. This is an entire theory of advising with 6 phases that an advisor can implement. This is just a very brief introduction, so don't get caught up in the theory. You can read more about appreciative advising and find out if it makes sense to adapt as part of your personal advising philosophy. However, due to its focus on the positive, I present it as a good model to make having difficult conversations with students easier for both you as the advisor and for the student. You can begin by starting to use positive questions in your advising conversations, such as, what is something you've learned about yourself during this process? What can you do today to bring you one step closer to your goals? Additional questions are included in the Tough Conversations resource document. You can see that the 6 phases of appreciative advising look very much like a regular advising session. They just provide you with a framework to do it from a more positive standpoint. The first step is disarming, making a positive first impression with the student, building rapport, and creating a safe, welcoming space, probably things you do normally. Discovering, dreaming, designing, all take you through the process of asking questions to learn about the student, coming up with what the student's hopes and goals are, and then coming up with a plan for those. And delivering is when the student delivers on the plan created during the other sessions and the advisor is available to encourage and support the students. And then don't settle is the last phase, where advisors and students need to set their own internal bars of expectations high. So you can see this takes a regular advising session and puts a positive spin on it throughout. If we use these types of positive frameworks in our everyday advising conversations, it will be second nature to do so in tough conversations as well. These frameworks aren't about avoiding reality or being positive just for the sake of good feelings. They're about helping students develop mindsets for success so that students can see that iceberg and realistically understand what it takes to be on the top of it. If students have a fixed mindset, or we're constantly focusing on what they have done wrong, they may never find the motivation, courage, or belief in their self and their abilities to get past the barriers in front of them. Look at these 3 statements that you might hear from a student. Take a minute to think about how the student could reword the statement to be more positive, to show a growth mindset. Now you can see an example of a positive response. Obviously, a student won't be able to jump to a growth mindset in one advising session. If you have a growth mindset or implement positive language in your advising interactions, you can help students see the differences though. Math is a challenge for me, but with support, I can learn and improve. I might not get it right this time, but I can learn from my mistake and do better next time. My instructor is providing me feedback, so I should think about it and see how I can use it to improve. So now think about how you could reframe these negative statements from students to help provide a new perspective. In the moment, they may not be able to see it immediately, but it can be helpful for a student to see their negative ideas turned into a positive by the advisor. Before we wrap up, I want to discuss what happens when the issues students face in the classroom go beyond academics. More often than we would like, the issues our students face have little to do with not understanding content and more to do with what's happening in their lives. Our students may face food or home insecurity, be dealing with illness of themselves or a loved one, taking care of their own kids, dealing with depression, anxiety, or other mental illnesses. They can be dealing with a number of things that are taking away their focus from school. Knowledge of resources and connecting students with the appropriate resource is essential. These are 4 resources that you can use whenever you meet with a student who may be facing bigger issues outside of school. The Community College Resource Finder, also known as Aunt Bertha, is a resource finder platform that helps connect students with social services for food, shelter, healthcare, work, financial assistance, and more. All they have to do is type in their zip code and find information about food, housing, etc., and see how to get connected with those resources. Faculty and staff can make referrals to the JCC care team if you have a concern about a student that's exhibiting troubling or threatening behaviors. The care team will reach out to students to provide guidance, interventions, or refer them to appropriate campus and community resources. You can find information about the JCC care team on the website. JCC's counseling services provide support to students facing difficulties that interfere with life and their academic success. On the website, they can find information about the Student Assistance Program, reasons to see a counselor, personal support, confidentiality, as well as find out how to make an appointment with one of the counselors. Students can also use the Elevation Market, which is a food pantry and career closet available to all JCC students. Our students may be facing a number of issues that go beyond academics, and having the appropriate conversations and being able to point the student in the direction of a useful resource can be essential in keeping them in school. I hope you find this presentation helpful and that you feel more comfortable with having tough conversations with students or having to deliver bad news. And maybe you might be interested in implementing some of the positive frameworks into your everyday conversations to make these tough conversations a little bit easier. If you have questions or would like to know more about any of the information we shared today, feel free to reach out to us at advising@mail.johnstoncc.edu.